Today's episode is a little bit different as we have a singular bookend, aka me, Hannah, as Lydia is currently quite unwell and unable to record. I'm sure you'll all join me in wishing that she gets better soon so you can have her back in your ears and I won't feel like my right arm is missing. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare.
Today's show is dedicated to our May book club pick, Scorched Grace. Scorched Grace is the first in an exciting new queer crime series by Margot Douaihy. Set against the backdrop of a sticky, oppressive New Orleans, we arrive at St. Sebastian's, a Catholic school that begins to endure countless arson attacks, setting the local community and police department into a frenzy. Dissatisfied with the official response, Sister Holiday, a sardonic and headstrong nun, decides to take matters into her own hands. But before she can begin to tackle this case, she must reckon with demons of her own. Margot Douaihy is a Lebanese-American writer and poet, originally from Pennsylvania. She received her MA in Creative and Life Writing from Goldsmiths University of London and a PhD in Creative Writing from Lancaster University. As a poet, she's the author of 3 collections, Girls Like You, I Would Ruby If I Could, and the true crime poetry project Bandit Queen, The Runaway Story of Belle Starr. Margot was a finalist for a Lambda Literary Award, Ascetica Magazine's Creative Writing Award, and the Ernest Hemingway Foundation's Hemingway Shorts. Margot is a founding member of the Creative Writing Studies Organisation and an active member of Sisters in Crime and the Radius of Arab American Writers. Scorched Grace is her debut novel and the first publication from Gillian Flynn, and I am thrilled to have Margot joining me today. So Margot, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
It is so wonderful to be here and just to be in your space, and folks who read and think so deeply about books are why we write. There, and I am that too. Before I was a crime writer or someone who thought about plot and structure, I was a fan too, and someone who takes books very seriously. I think art can change culture. It can change our version of ourselves. So this is really special, and I'm so delighted and I feel very honored and lucky to be here. So thanks.
No, I'm so delighted to have you. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited that this is our May book club pick. And I really hope that we can get as many listeners as possible reading this because it is so brilliant. And yeah, thank you for writing it. So we usually like to ease our interviewees in with our favorite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
Well, I just finished it, so I don't know if this would really qualify, but the absolutely blistering and brilliant My Sister the Serial Killer.
It's so good.
It's so good. And it's worth a reread, if you have already read it. But
yes,
I just absolutely adore this space of the mystery, of noir, of crime fiction. And, what Braithwaite has done with this book is just expand and explode and shatter our notions of what even the notions of like a witty or satirical take on crime fiction can be, because of the profound questions about family and sistership and loyalty and self-concept and how they all braid together is just so funny. It's one of the funniest and deeply moving books that I've read, and I like to traffic in that space too. My holy trinity, as it were, which is a bit sacrilegious, but my holy trinity is sad, sexy, funny. So
love it.
I just think that's or sad, beautiful, funny, or sad, alluring, funny. However you want to take that one corner of the triangle. And I think that work like this, I just aspire to this greatness and also intersectionality and the ways that we think about identity and the investigative method and all of that. So a lot of that's in Scorched Grace, but I read widely and I love to be completely blown away and envious of the writing skills of peers and others, and also folks that have, written 50, 60 years ahead of me. And hopefully, we all continue on this weird course and journey that we're all on as crime writers. But yes, so this serial killer, just finished it recently, and my TBR pile is like a constant towering stack that's falling over.
You and me both. You and me both. My Sister the Serial Killer is such a phenomenal book, and I pretty much inhaled it on like one train journey. It was a long train journey, to be fair, but I read that so quickly. I flew through it and just wasn't expecting it to, just the roller coaster that it takes you on. It gets so dark, and then it's just so funny, and you don't know what you don't know what emotion is going to come out of you next. And I just loved the sister dynamic in that. I'm one of 4 sisters, so that was like perfect for me. I was like, please, can none of you become a serial killer? Thank you.
It just keeps it so real. Like, I love what you say about not sure what emotion's going to tumble out of you next, because that is so vital, and it's so true to the authentic experience of being a sister, or having a sister who is both insufferable and who you would put yourself on the tracks for and literally risk either going to jail or some moral infraction, because that's just what it's like. And the way she narrativizes that tension, and just, again, the humor is seriously one of the funniest books that I have read in years. And yet it's this gruesome scenario. And I aspire to that. And it's funny because with Scorched Grace, I've heard the whole gamut of, wow, this is one of the grimmest, most ferocious, dark books that I've read, and also it's so funny. So I love that wild swing, and I think everything in between is just fair game, because that's just life.
Yes, so true. And just because you've just been showing the amazing cover, before I ask about the inspiration behind Scorched Grace, just because you've just shown it to me, I have to ask about this cover, because I am so shallow in the sense that I will happily pick up a book based on the cover, and and I could not get over this cover. It is amazing. Like, I think it is one of my favorite covers of all time. It's so good. Like, who came up with this? Tell me what was the concept? Who designed it? I need to know.
It is truly, and I agree. And I'm sure that, with Zoom, it's probably showing backwards or forwards or upside down, or who knows what, but it's just the central motif. One of them in the book is stained glass, and how it is both this cohesive experience of seeing, as well as jagged and shattered. And you can see both the narrative story and the union, as well as the disharmony in the places that are cleaved. And so then you have this figure of Sister Holiday as an icon, as iconic, through, this shady, almost old school PI canonical hard-boiled sleuth, or hard-boiled mystery noir figure who's half shrouded and half alert, and sort of watching. And then she has this lit cigarette, which is a bit of a middle finger, I must say. But then you have this true and enduring symbol of her faith, her true faith, which is right over the heart center. And so you have a lot of the paradoxes that drive this investigator, this sleuth, this woman, this queer woman, this servant of something higher than herself. So you have a lot of the contradictions and the multitudes that fuel this character, and that cast suspicion upon her by all the people that are in her life. It was created under the shrewd artistic direction of Evan Gaffney, who is Zando, Gillian Flynn Books art director. And the illustrator and designer of the cover is named Will Stalla, who has done a lot of the covers for Stephen King. He did John Grisham's recent cover. He's done Cory Doctorow. He's done a lot of the big books that you see. And I mean, and I say this with a lot of pride and a lot of humility and ownership, that I'm a nobody, until recently, sort of making a big commercial break. I was writing in obscurity for about 20 years, writing weird poetry books, and strange hybrid things, and just be for the sheer love and passion and need and almost obsession with it. So to land, this book with Gillian Flynn, and then to have someone like Will Stalla and Evan Gaffney working on this cover, they both read the book. They both, I think, are big fans of noir and mystery and crime, and they wanted to do something totally different than your typical. There's a lot of themes and almost memes with crime fiction covers, mysteries. So they wanted to go completely in a different direction. And this is also the first book in a series, so something that could use bits of the visual vocabulary to go through a series, depending perhaps on color palette. So, a lot of the book is told right here on the cover, and it's really exciting to see it when you walk into a bookstore. It'll never get old, ever.
I can imagine. It's perfect. It is just one of the most perfect covers I've seen. And Lydia will be really sad that she's not here to tell this story, but I will tell it for her. She went to one of her friend's grandma's house recently, and her friend's grandma is a Jehovah's Witness, and Lydia takes a book everywhere with her just in case, and then she went to pull it out and then realized, the cover. I don't know if this is a good idea, and just slid it back into her bag.
Right under the sweater.
Hide it. So yeah, it is a really great cover. And I loved hearing you say then about that you've been writing obscurely for 20 years, writing weird poetry collections. I mean, I'm sure they're not weird. And I'm really eager to read them after reading this. So it's just amazing, I think, for any other writers that listen to the podcast, for them to hear that, these things sometimes do take time, but you just need that sort of one yes, and it will happen. It can happen. And I think, for any creatives out there, certainly like me and Lydia have said on the podcast before, like we're both actors, and it is just sometimes a waiting game, and you can be so impatient. But I think definitely your story of being picked up, and you're the first publication of Gillian Flynn's books, aren't you? So that's incredible. It's huge.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's surreal. And I would have been that person too that would sort of, you get used to it in a way of either rejection or just that swimming upstream. And I think in terms of, the acting world, the writing world, they're so similar, whether it's screenwriting, novel writing, creative, high experimental literary fiction, memoir, all of it, without 20 billion followers on social media or some kind of dynastic wealth so that, you're a trust fund person or something like that. It's a struggle. It's a schlep. It's a trek, whatever that might mean for different people. If you have kids or family or an aging pet, anything, there's a lot of hurdles that we have to overcome to do what we love. And in my case, and I will now shout about this from every rooftop, is that you just have to stay with it. And it might take 20 years, it might take 2 years. Good art will be seen because it's something that means something to you. We all have our unique DNA. In my case, lexical DNA with my words. In your case, with the work you do as media and curator with your literary work and as well as acting, we all have something true to us. And so that is why I always fight to stay with it and never to give up. And it might morph. It might, I was writing poetry exclusively for 15 years. And then eventually it was getting longer and longer and longer. And I'm a huge mystery fan, and I merged those worlds into Scorched Grace and this series of, this queer, devoted punk rock riot girl nun. So, never say never.
Very true. Never say never. That can be the title of this episode.
Yeah.
Now, I really want to hear more about Scorched Grace because I'm already loving hearing you speak about it. I would love to know what the inspiration for Scorched Grace was. And yes, could you tell us a bit more about that and why you wanted to make that move from poetry to fiction?
Yeah, and poetry will always be that deep love. It'll always be the heartbeat, that are the first of the sequence. And there is a sensibility, as a place I go back to as a homecoming in a lot of ways. But I wanted to contribute something to this canon that I love so much, and also push against these notions of what the received canon is. So, the in my case, I love the hard-boiled style of mystery storytelling and if folks are listening right now and don't really understand what that term means, like I'll try to give a really quick definition of it as the way I understand it, which is a mystery that centers a figure who would be considered hard-boiled in the sense that they're hard living, they have some hard-won wisdom, they're hard to be around, and they maybe are hard drinking or hardly, addicted to something that is outside of themselves. And they're quite stubborn. They call themselves a kind of a lone wolf. And really this term was popularized by the Black Mask magazine, short stories in which you have writers like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammond and then others, in that lineage, centering these private eyes who have their own firms or they're working on their own and they're solving cases, usually for clients. And so that's a very, very, very general description of it. And you have other writers that take it in way different directions or take a component of it or one tenet of that and totally mess with it, put it in a blender and take it somewhere else. So for me, it's the sensibility of this person who they know that the world is really screwed up and it's really broken, and they actually are quite broken. And that's why you have a lot of the humor and very reflexive wisecracks. And I'm sure we know people like this, and even to some extent I have been like that, where something serious comes up and you get a joke in response. And usually that's because there's some kind of armor against some inner vulnerability or even inner terror. And I think that's very compelling to me as a narratorial figure, because you can get this person almost like plowing through the narrative space to solve the mystery. And it's this internal external mirroring where the clues, they're assembling the clues or they're reassembling them as they in turn figure out something about themselves or their own inner experience, whether they point to it directly or not. There's a lot of subtext in Hardboiled. And so I just love reading these stories. I love the old stories from the 20s, 30s, 40s. I love the countercultural, feminist, intersectional, Black excellence takes on them from Walter Mosley, Sarah Peretti, and then the whole, trajectory after that. So, I firmly try to root this in the Hardboiled school. We get into it in the second book in the series where she actually, spoiler alert, but it's set up in the first book where she does part-time gigs with a PI agency.
Love it.
But I wanted to balance that with someone who genuinely has this faithful, very unusual, strange relationship with her own faith and her own identities. So none of that could really happen coherently or in a satisfying way in poetry or prose poetry. It had to be a novel, has to be a crime fiction experience. But to that extent, I also tried to shred the template a little bit and keep it lyrical, use some lyrical patterning, queer the structure in the sense where you don't know exactly who holds the power, where is there an unreliable narrator. So taking very traditional forms of like a 3-act structure, for example, and just weaving in, motifs and lyricism and even scripture verse or punk lyrics and kind of trying to keep it a little transgressive. So all of that's just, a lot of words to say. I knew I had to write a mystery novel, but I really wanted to keep it in a space that felt unexpected to me which is why I took a long time to write. Cause I was like, what the hell is this? Eventually I figured it out, but I wanted to kind of keep it inventive for my own self and for the characters, all of the characters too.
How long did it take to write?
It took 4 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But it was living in my head for about maybe 9. I had this idea that I wanted to make the figure of a nun. I went to Catholic school. A lot of my early teachers were nuns. They were all above the age of 80 and 90. And I wanted to think about like a purpose-driven life or a duty-bound person who's like an investigator or these old school lone wolf, unmarried dudes, who are mostly in these early stories with the hats and the trench coats and the cigarettes, and make her nun, really recast this script as a totally unpredictable and strange, but like genuine and authentic person who just doesn't fit into one box or another. And so, some people are like, what? When I try to tell them about the novel, I'm like, just read it. Just give it a shot. And then I've had other people say like, oh, that's like really doesn't, she sounds like a mystery, even just in the description. I'm like, well, that's sort of part of the motor of it.
Yeah, I think she's one of my favorite protagonists. And I love what you said about her not sort of wanting her to fit into a box, because you definitely get a sense of that. And I will be honest, me and Lydia, we sort of hear crime novel and we're kind of like shy away from it. It's not our usual go-to. And it was weird that you mentioned My Sister the Serial Killer before, because I remember reading that and loving that. But most of the time when I think about crime fiction, I think of how that genre, and maybe it's just the books that I've come across, but it feels very dominated by like straight white male stories. And I really felt like you breathed new life into that genre, and it was such an addictive read. And I mean, you just the way that you examine like gender and race and sexuality and faith, it was just such a compelling read. And yeah, just completely bow down to you for that. And obviously you've mentioned that crime is something that you're drawn to as a reader. What kind of crime were you going for? Like, what would you kind of recommend to somebody that just thinks that crime is dominated by these straight white male stories? What would you sort of recommend?
And it certainly still is. If you look at any bestseller list, you'll still have some of those just touchstone names that reappear. And no doubt, they've got their bona fides, and I read and I'm amazed by their craft as well. But for me, I love that idea that a mystery is just this promise to the reader that there is something to solve. Whereas you have in literary fiction, it's all up for grabs. Is it an oblique ode to indecision? Great. Is it an exploration of a day in the life of Clarissa Dalloway using neural pathway synaptic M80s or wonderful, I love it all. But with crime fiction, with mysteries, it's like, a reader goes to the bookshop, you go to the shelf or you go to the section, you thinking, I want something that I want to be a part of. So I love that. I love how it is this almost invitation to the reader to sort of step up and solve alongside of a detective figure, whether it's the narrator, whether it's a police officer, whatever, or in my case, an amateur sleuth turned part-time PI. So for me, I look to folks that are bringing intersectional perspectives into it, like My Sister the Serial Killer, like Marcie Rendon, who is an Indigenous crime writer. Kelly J. Ford is Southern Gothic with a lesbian twist in the US. And, writers that are weaving together questions of self and questions of powerlessness, critique of institutions. And, in the UK, it's just like, brimming with just remarkable authors as well, too many to name, but for me, it's just that beautiful Venn diagram of like, yes, I get to solve a mystery or see if I can, because I love feeling like an idiot at the end. You want to feel like, oh my God, how did I miss that? Or what's the sleight of hand that's actually happening here? And then, but also see a meditation on family, on sistership, on the patriarchy, or, in my case, I'm trying to examine, explore institutional corruption or the ways that we grieve and how we can be blindsided by the needs to belong wherever that takes us, and also addiction and pain and just resilience, and I think noir offers us that. It can be super bleak, super grim, a lot of despair, but really they can be case studies in how we rise up and how we look for those pathways to resilience. So yeah, I mean, I can go on. Like, I'm just trying to think of who else I'm reading. S.A. Cosby, tremendous writer who wrote a book called Razorblade Tears. That was a New York Times bestseller. Oh, it's so good. You'll love it. And it's about two fathers, recent ex-cons, one white, one black, and they both get the news that their gay sons, who were married to each other, were murdered. And so they have, really nothing in common except that they were both in jail, and they both had these sons that they rejected whilst they were alive. And then they go on this path of vengeance to like rain down vengeance on who killed their boys.
Wow.
And it is just, it is like, oh my God, it's so gripping and it's so brilliantly rendered. And those are the kinds of crime stories that I can't get enough of, because they give you these, and Gillian Flynn says it herself, they're almost like these Trojan horse frameworks, or these interpretive frameworks. Get this great mystery. You can even get a freight train of a mystery. And then like a real exploration, a deep, deep meditation on something very profound.
I think maybe I've been giving crime fiction I've been giving it a bad rep, because I didn't know all this stuff was out there, and now I'm like, okay, I'm ready now. I'm gonna go order all these books. My TBR pile is gonna be what have you done, Margot?
I'm sorry, guilty as charged. But you're right, though. They were, I think, really there's, now I think the marketplace, which has been so dominated by profit and margin and the real urgent need to make your money back if you were to give a huge advance to one of these big, huge heavyweights that we know, and again, you got tremendous writers who make the big bucks, but I think the marketplace is so smart now, and readers are so hungry for gripping new stories that push the boundaries and give us ways to see ourselves. So publishers are really getting smart to that, hip to that as well, and thinking, you know what, we can actually make the financial investment in some of these writers that may not be well known, but they're doing some really brilliant excavation and offering readers something really compelling, gripping, real rippers. So I think that it's, I don't know, relatively kind of new. So I'm here for it. I'm totally here for it.
I mean, speaking of compelling and gripping, we cannot speak about Scorched Grace without speaking about your incredible protagonist, Sister Holiday. Like I said, she's one of my favorite characters now, and I'm so excited that there's going to be more books, and she's going to be in these books. She's still at the center, isn't she?
Oh yeah.
Yes. Okay, because I was like, for a second, I was like, wait. Now, she's a very complex character, and she likes to go from one extreme to the other. She's got a very complicated past, which you beautifully feed to the reader like a trail of crumbs that I was willing to follow you wherever you were going to take me. I didn't know, it was so unpredictable. I didn't know where her story was going to go, what had happened in her past. But there are, without giving any spoilers, there are reasons for why she is the way she is, like there is with any of us. How do you go about building a character like Sister Holiday? Did you start with her backstory, or did you just kind of start writing and find out new things about her along the way?
It starts with the voice. Sister Holiday's voice is the alpha and the omega, and she's really different from me. And yet I feel, I talk to her all the time. It's a bit schizophrenic in a lot of ways. There's a lot of words to tell you. And I'm sure when you're inhabiting the role of character as an actor or director, screenwriter, any part of that ecosystem of storytelling, and you really do have to lock into the cadence, lock into the rhythm. Everybody has a different way of speaking, and so for her, the voice is everything. And then again, that is very hard boiled in my opinion, where you just have almost this, someone just kind of puts you in a bit of a chokehold from the very beginning and grabs you by the throat. And for this book, and for indeed the series, Sister Holiday has a way of seeing the world and then telling you how she sees the world. So she gripes about her students, she complains mercilessly about them, and yet, she's on this in this world because she believes in the greater good. And she has this punishing way of lacerating herself in a lot of ways of beating herself up. And yet she's really kind of egotistical. She says that her wisdom holds a lot of grace, and she can do it better than anyone else, and only she can solve this, and the police are useless, and Ravoux is too slow. But yet, she warms up to her in the ways that sometimes, good friends do, and they love to razz each other and rib each other. And so her voice started it all. And in that, as you talk about the backstory, or I guess, interestingly, I don't really believe in backstory. I feel like it's all story, as long as it does, it can never decelerate. I really try to create a real pace with this book, and moments that may feel as if they are just a touch less, with less scrutiny or more fun and games. Some of the erotic scenes are like that, where you have, or perhaps the stories that may be told in a narrative present. And that's really part of the design, where I kind of, it's almost like in the roller coaster where it's like click, click, click. And then as you're kind of going right up, and then you have that free fall. It's a part of that acceleration palette, where you have what's things that seem like they're a little slower, kind of by design. So her voice does that as well, where it's almost like when you're sort of like, yeah, everybody gather around. Okay, you're taking that beat, really that beat, or if I'm like about to tell you the person that I saw, you'll never believe. And it was, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, to do that with words is really fun and interesting. And my editor, Serena Kamath, is absolutely brilliant, because she has that aerial view where she can see where there is a little bit of deceleration. We could tighten that up there. And Gillian herself, who is, I think, has the distinct honor of, like, she handed in Gone Girl almost completely done, which to me is like, I can never get my mind around that, because, that it takes such incredible risks with the storytelling. But back to the voices, Sister Holiday's voice has to give you the contradictions of this character in a way that feel authentic, earned, and completely seductive, in the sense that a friend of yours who's telling you about how they sabotage just about everything in their life, and you just continue to go back to them and go back to them, because then they, give you the greatest hug, or, you have the night of karaoke that you shut down the pub, or whatever it is, like the people in your life that are unforgettable. And I try to create that with this character who, she's hurt, and she hurts people. She's flawed. She says things that I would never say. She does things that I would never do, because I think that's what creates memorable characters who you can really want to root for, even as you're like, how and why did you just do that? And, can be really problematic within the world that they've created for themselves. But nonetheless, you're like, okay, I see now why she's doing this. And for me, with a series or someone who's investigating mysteries, and even can redefine the idea of crime, because I think that's, for queer people, we've been cast suspicion, we've been the source of a lot of criminality and suspicion ourselves. So I think it's about time that queer crime writers kind of get into this space and move around the pieces of the chessboard and ask questions. And really, this is a book of questions as well as answers.
Absolutely. And she is such an interesting character, and she's so layered, and she doesn't always make the best choices, and she has a past of being self-destructive. I'm gonna be very careful about any spoilers, but with the band, and she's had an affair, and she's just got quite a past. And she's been through so much, with her parents were not the happiest about her coming out, and the same with her brother, and she's got a lot of issues with her family. And there's so many themes that you explored beautifully, which were like grief and shame, and how they sort of fester in a person, and what that can do, and the lasting impact that has, and how that informs like their later choices. And it's what I was saying earlier about how she kind of, it seems that she goes from like one extreme to the next. She has this past of like, she was knocking back whiskeys like there's no tomorrow, and making these poor choices, and then she goes from that to being like, it's almost like, yeah, I'm still not going to deal with any of this, I'm just going to go and become a nun. And so it's like, yeah, okay, you're doing something great now, but you're still not dealing with all of these problems. You just
Exactly.
kind of go. But she's such an unforgettable character, and I'm just really grateful that you wrote her.
Thank you. It's in a way playing with that trope of like, get thee to a nunnery, or just the ways that we, and I think the human mammal We look for either refuge or solace or escape, whether it's in daydreams or work addiction or other people. And it makes sense because life is really hard. Life can be really gorgeous and almost viciously beautiful, and it can be really difficult and really challenging. And, addiction is something that I try to reimagine in the book as well, because in some ways she's a bit addicted to religion and she's a bit addicted to structure, but she's trying to do good things with it. And even as she's griping and complaining about her students and the other nuns in the convent. So I try not to cast a bit of, I guess I do, judgment through the eyes of the character, just sort of taking one idea like religion or school and just showing that, it can launch people in these dramatically different directions. So I'm a huge advocate of finding pathways for ourselves into institutions like school, teaching, work, purpose, values. Like in the United States, we have this horrific acceleration of both legislation and divisive, damaging rhetoric. Asked and explored, anti-choice. I'm not sure if this is like political fair game in a book, a conversation about books, but in the book, I'm trying to just showcase that everybody has a unique story to tell and a unique relationship with, the cross that she wears around her neck or the tattoos that adorn her body, and that making snap judgments about people and then even leveraging what people think of as like a value to divide. It's never going to work. And, what we see here in the US is that we're the queer community. We want more intersectional stories. We want more amplification of voices. And so I try to bring a lot of these State of the Nation polemics into the book while keeping it fun, strange, rock and roll, and a bit of a kind of a, I don't know, like an FU to the power structure, but also keeping it artful and keeping it inquisitive and not necessarily over architecting how to feel, but just giving these characters who are wading through all of these waters and making mistakes. And, I feel particularly proud and so grateful to Gillian, to Zando for giving me to Pushkin Press in the UK and Ireland, to giving a platform for telling queer stories and thinking about that. And, honestly, that is part of just the driving impetus behind the character. And, again, like this, even going back to your question about the covers, like it's all these fires that are just keeping me going back to the blank page.
And I think you're so right. Like it's so important that we amplify these stories. And I really, really want to speak to you about, obviously with Sister Holiday, a huge part of her identity is her queerness. And I think that's what I found hugely exciting about a novel set in a Catholic school. And as Holiday is a nun, I don't think I've ever seen a queer nun represented in fiction before. Maybe I've missed that, but this is certainly a first. And I often sort of discuss I don't know what the right word is, maybe dichotomy between religion and queerness with my friend who is a queer writer. She wrote a play, it's an amazing play about the church as a system and the sort of trauma that it's inflicted on women and on queer people, historically. And it's just something that I feel really passionate about. And I wanted to kind of ask, and I hope you don't mind me asking, what your relationship is to faith and to the Catholic Church, and why it was important for this story to come from a queer perspective.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that question, and I want to see your friend's play too.
Amazing.
What's the name of it?
It's called Pure.
Oh, I love that title.
Because of all of the awful issues with purity rings and the fact that she was given those at the age of 11. And it's just, there's a whole bucket of worms, or whatever you would call it. It's a can of worms, not bucket of worms.
Well, I have, an interesting relationship with faith and with, I guess you'd say, structured or institutional faith. in the sense that I was raised Catholic. I was raised Maronite Catholic, which is the Catholicism of Lebanon, Syria, Palestine. But in the U.S., the diaspora, my great grandparents, etc. So it's very much like Roman Catholic faith, and it's under the papal authorities. And then I did attend a Catholic school until I was, I believe, 13 for 8 years. So in the US, a kindergarten through 8th grade. And I was baptized. I had my first Holy Communion and my confirmation. Interestingly, sidebar, all of those involve wearing almost bridal gowns. Like, what's up with that? Creepy white frilly, like, whoa, let's really reevaluate a lot of the visual semiotics and the meanings of all of this.
Yeah.
So I never felt the call personally. My family is quite religious. I have a family member who's a deacon in the Maronite church. I used to read, the first holy readings during service and mass. I never felt the call though. I would sit in the pews and I would look around at the stained glass and love that. And I loved the high camp and theatricality of it. Gowns and gold and, the chanting and the music and the incense that just knocked you out with its intensity, frankincense and myrrh. I was like totally down for all of that. And I loved the community aspect of it. And it brings people, it brought my family and still does bring my parents and my family a tremendous amount of comfort. And yet for more than 2,000 years, this institution has wrought tremendous pain and damage and, forcibly removed Indigenous kids from families in the US and Canada in the res schools. We see the trail of destruction in Ireland with the laundries. Anywhere you go, bam, whoa, like priest abuse and all of that, nuns complicit. I wanted to tell a different story where I don't cast a kind of one script on the story of being someone who is yes and yes, they are queer and yes, they are Catholic. Because again, I think it's just really important to write personal entry point into it. And as a narrative exploration, I think that's fascinating. But I wanted this character to have both a passionate commitment to herself as a queer person, defining that for herself and what that means, because no one can tell you how to be queer, and no one can, I don't personally believe no one can tell you how to believe in a higher power. And so maybe that would automatically make me an iconoclast and would automatically eject me from Catholic Church. But they're just, to me, and I say this again with a tremendous amount of respect, these are just batches of stories, whether it's, the Old Testament, these are stories. And for some people, for this character, it is real, like it is transubstantiation. It is real for her, and it is real for my family and for people. And it is inside of me because I was raised with this faith. So this was reparative. This was a reparative measure for me to write this character. Now, when I go by and I walk by a Catholic church and I just think of Sister Holiday, and in some ways, like she's repaired a lot of Catholic trauma that I have had because she believes, and she's in some ways a bridge between a world that I felt very othered from and felt a lot of pain with, and I try to bring in a lot of queer and camp love and affection, with her and her character. In some ways, she thinks of her own brother as kind of a gay Jesus, and and he shows up big time in book 2, and just in the same way that camp is like high stylized and is a vital part of queer expression in the kind of a Susan Sontag sort of a way. I think, like, when I think of movies like Sister Act or ways that we've built storytelling around nuns, it all feels very celebratory, and also it holds space for institutional critique. So she's really devout. She genuinely believes. No one can take that away from her. And yet, she's also like super, super, super queer, like a kind of a gold star lesbian. And no one can take that away from her. So she's just doing her own thing. She's marching the beat of her own drummer. And I think it's just, for me, an experience of like a sleuth that just kind of keeps everybody on their toes for just living a life that she, for whatever reasons, feels like she wants to authentically live.
Absolutely. And I love the way you've just spoken about that. And it just seems that anybody that's had sort of a religious upbringing has had, that kind of not sure where they sit with it. Either people are straight away devout, but I mean, most of them, I'm not making any sense now, but I was speaking to the
I
same.
hear you. It's tough to talk about sometimes.
Yeah, it's really complex. And I was having this conversation with my friend the other day, and it's the same friend that I mentioned before. And she was saying, there's a huge difference between she was basically asked about, how can she still, believe in all of this when she's a queer person. And she was kind of like, well, like I can separate like my faith and my relationship with God is private, and that's for me, and that's between me and my God. But it's the whole sort of patriarchal structure of like the church and that whole system that's the thing that she can't get behind, and that's the thing that she kind of lost trust in. It's not she never lost faith, it's that she lost trust in that, and that's like two separate things. And I think it's sort of similar with Sister Holiday. I mean, obviously she works within that system, but you still get a sense of like her faith is like her private thing, and that's the thing that's brought her comfort, and she's sort of separated the two, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I love the way you describe that through your friend and through art. And again, I feel like the more we try to just hold space for what feels right and
Mhm.
healing for us or life-giving or vital is a beautiful thing,
Mhm.
and I applaud folks who kind of go against the grain, whatever that might be.
Mhm.
So I think that, and it makes for really interesting art because I love to see the new within the familiar. So again, like with a mystery or with a genre in general, I think that it makes for great territory, like almost really interesting, fertile territory. And so in my contribution with like a gold tooth, hair trigger temper, fisticuffs nun who also believes in transubstantiation, that's kind of my where I'm sitting right now.
Now, I really want to talk to you as well about the setting of the novel. Now, it's set in New Orleans, and you definitely get a real sense of your passion for the city. And whilst for me, I know very little about New Orleans and have probably seen very little, it's not a place that's necessarily represented very much apart from, Hurricane Katrina. That's probably the extent of my knowledge of New Orleans. And, you touch on that in the book of Hurricane Katrina, and you see the lasting impact of that horrendous tragedy. But I'd love to know, aside from Hurricane Katrina, I'm sure there's much more to New Orleans than that. And you definitely sort of go into that in the book. But could you describe why New Orleans, it was important to set your novel in New Orleans, and what you wanted to represent of that city?
Thanks for picking up on that because I think setting is so crucial within
Mm.
crime fiction, and whether it's the St. Mary Mead of Miss Marple and Christie, or the seedy, seductive LA of Chandler, or whatever it might be. Setting I take very seriously, and I want it to be its own protagonist. And for me, it's like it is more about the understory and writing different on ramps into understanding what place can be for characters. So in New Orleans, you have this cultural, almost vandalized narrative of like freewheeling, laissez-faire, carnival, Mardi Gras, and that is all true. Like, yes, it totally, it's called like, I don't even know, open, like you can just grab a drink and just sort of walk around with like an open can, like with alcohol, and like their big drink is like that you can get on Bourbon Street. It's called the Hurricane, which is like a funny, dance with fate. But you have the life urge and the death urge, the Eros and the Thanatos, right at play in this place. It's on the Gulf. In my opinion, it is the most important city in the United States, more than New York or LA. And I wanted to really give it its space to have that dripping kind of humid warmth that's very expansive, but then
Mm.
also underneath. So the questions of like, what is under the surface and what is in the shadows? And with this character, as she's walking, she's constantly feeling like these eyes on her. And that is this, whether it's paranoia or legitimate, kind of creates this texture that to me is just inextricably linked with New Orleans, which is a place of texture, a place of contour, a place of contradictions, and life. And it's about life after the destruction. So it has a lot of its own expertise with resilience and music. It's the birthplace of jazz. So in some ways, if it's the birthplace of jazz, it's the birthplace of improvisation. So I was like, okay, here's this character. She kind of takes a cherry bomb to her life in New York and she goes to New Orleans. So it's like New York to New Orleans, rebirth in her own right. And there's also that liturgical element of like, you know, restarting one's life in a way that is aligned with some of the Catholic tenets. So New Orleans was the perfect place. And, you know, the fact that she's a musician, she's a guitarist in this post-punk band, and music connects her old life and her new life. And so in a place like New Orleans, in the early part of the book, as she's being punished, which she is a lot, her job is to clean the stained glass. And she discovers that if she presses her eye to this one part of this big stained glass piece, which inevitably is the eye of Mary, Mother Mary, so you could actually see the city below. So the city itself is like her canvas too. So it's like my canvas as the author, but it's like her canvas. So it really is just this mysterious place. And I wanted these like kind of layers of mystery. Like as you talked about her tattoos, which I'm glad you picked up on, like it's her way of becoming a text because she's got it all tatted up. And so people, if her scarf falls or if her gloves fall off because her mother superior requires her to cover herself, then people notice and they try to decipher her. And same with New Orleans, people see it in certain ways. It's almost like a little Rorschach test for all the characters.
I love what you said about the tattoos then as well. I think tattoos are such a huge form of expression, and it's sort of a reclaiming the sort of narrative of yourself. And I loved that she was a tattooed queer nun. I think I loved so much about her. And I think just hearing you talk about New Orleans, if the book hadn't already made me want to go, I think like I'm fully ready now to just go book myself a ticket. It sounds amazing.
Do a Sister Holiday walking tour.
Yes. Oh my gosh, can we make this happen, please?
A pair of Bookends Sister Holiday walking tour.
Stunning. That is perfect. I have just seen the time and I'm so upset because I could probably talk to you for about 3 hours about this book. I had many other questions, but I would love to squeeze one in. I have read that the TV and film rights have already been sold, and our listeners will probably be rolling their eyes right now because they know how much I love an adaptation. I have been begging Lydia to let me do an adaptation series for the longest time on the podcast, and she's still not let me. But I need to know, are you allowed to give any details whatsoever about this? No?
We are so close. I truly, if it's, oh gosh, a week or two from now. But honestly, I'm so excited to share with your community. So whoever's listening, like I will personally like I will tell everyone, you know, as soon as we get the clearance to share. There's actually a writer's strike right now in the United States, but there's going to be really exciting news coming very soon. And it's truly, again, I just feel like I've won the cosmic lottery here because just, you know, I was writing this work without any, you know, hope or whatever publication. This is the biggest bonus of all. And so I also love screen adaptations of books. Like I love Sharp Objects, the screen adaptation of Gillian Flynn's book. And
I haven't watched the adaptation of that. Okay.
It's really different. And it breaks a lot of the temporal plane and, you know, but, and she wrote a couple of the episodes and I think they're really stellar, but yeah, I think that'd be a great series. Lydia, come on.
Honestly, maybe when this comes out, she might let me. She might be like, okay, you've touched my arm now. Yeah, I absolutely cannot wait to see what happens with this. And when I know I'm slightly impatient because this has only just come out like a month ago in the UK, but when's the next book?
Yeah, blessed water, and it takes place over Good Friday, Saturday, and Easter Sunday. And you will be happy to know it is the exact same length as this fine book here, and it is
Gorgeous.
designed to be devoured in one train ride.
Yes.
That's a whole other story, but yeah, it'll be out in the spring 2024.
Amazing. I'm very impatient for this, and I already love the metaphors that I can feel with the whole Easter weekend. I love it. I love it. I love your writing. I love you. I
Oh, me
wish I could
too.
chat to you forever. I love this book. Listeners, please go and buy it. It is out now in the UK and the US and Ireland. And I believe it's being published in Australia on the 30th of May. Is that right?
Yep,
And it's
30th
also,
of May. Yeah.
and it's going to be out in Brazil, Poland, and somewhere else this year.
In France, and hopefully some more soon.
Yes, all of the places. But I will pop a link in the show notes for our UK and US and Ireland listeners so they can go grab your book and then they can devour it like I did and then hopefully enjoy this conversation as much as I have. And I'm really sad to let you go, Margot. Thank you so, so much for joining me.
It's just an absolute thrill. I'm so excited this will like live in my head for a long, long, long time. So thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's listening and watching whenever that might be.
No, thank you so much. And can our listeners find you on social media?
Yes, I'm terrible at social media, but I do try. I've been trying to make more of an effort. I am on Instagram at Neon Margot. That's Margot with a T. And then on Twitter, despite my great efforts to get off of it. But I love connecting with readers wherever you are. So yeah, send me a line, and when I check it twice a week, I will sincerely love to connect with you there.
Yes, and listeners, if you do buy the book, which we're hoping that you will, please do tag us with any of your thoughts so we can keep this conversation going. Margot, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And until next time, please come back for your next book.
You know it. You know it.
Thank you, listeners, for listening. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe as it helps to boost us in the charts. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.